No one in the throne chamber understood the moment it happened. Not the armored guards standing like statues beneath pillars of living crystal. Not the advisors whispering over star maps that stretched across half a galaxy. Not even the queen herself, whose presence alone had silenced wars and reshaped civilizations. And certainly not the human. Because in the middle of the most powerful court in the known systems, the royal heir quietly climbed into his lap, curled against him, and fell asleep as if she had always belonged there. The silence that followed was not ordinary silence. It was the kind that felt dangerous. The kind that made entire empires hesitate. Ethan Hale had prepared for many outcomes before stepping into the throne room of the Velaran Empire. He had studied their customs, memorized their gestures of respect, and trained himself to remain calm under pressure. But there was no preparation for this. One moment, he had been seated at the outer circle of the chamber, observing the council debate resource allocation across orbital colonies. The next, he was frozen in place, acutely aware of one undeniable fact. The princess was asleep on him. Her breathing was soft, steady, completely untroubled. One small hand gripped the fabric of his uniform as though it anchored her to something safe. Her silver hair spilled across his arm, faintly glowing under the ambient light of the chamber. And around them, an entire empire watched. Ethan did not move. He couldn't. Not because he was afraid of the guards, though they were watching him with the focus of predators, but because something deeper held him still. The child trusted him. That realization settled heavier than the weight of the entire court. Across the chamber, the queen had stopped speaking. She sat upon a throne carved from a single shard of luminescent stone. Her posture composed, her expression unreadable. Yet her eyes, sharp, ancient, impossibly aware, were fixed entirely on the human holding her daughter. No one gave orders. No one dared. Time stretched. Minutes passed like hours. The advisors attempted to resume their discussion, but their voices had lowered to uncertain murmurs, as though speaking too loudly might shatter something fragile. Even the hovering drones that monitored environmental conditions adjusted their movement, gliding more quietly through the air. Everything in the chamber had changed. Ethan became aware of his own breathing, carefully measured so as not to disturb the sleeping child. His legs had already begun to protest, but he ignored it. Movement was not an option. He glanced down slightly. The princess, no older than 8 by human standards, looked peaceful in a way that did not belong in a place like this. Her features were relaxed, her expression free of the tension that seemed to define every other being in the room. Didn't make sense. This was the heart of a galactic empire. And yet, here she was, asleep like a child who had finally found rest. A guard approached, tall, armored, silent. He stopped just close enough to speak without raising his voice, his gaze never leaving Ethan's face. "You are aware," the guard murmured carefully, "that you are holding the royal heir." Ethan resisted the urge to swallow. "Yes, Oz. You understand the implications." "I'm beginning to." The guard studied him for a moment longer, then shifted his gaze toward the princess. Something in his rigid posture softened, just slightly, before he stepped back into position. Even they didn't know what to do. That realization was somehow more unsettling than anything else. At the center of power, there was no protocol for kindness. Another 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Ethan's legs were now completely numb, but he refused to adjust his position. Every instinct told him that even the smallest movement could wake her. And something told him waking her would be a mistake. Not politically, not diplomatically, something more human than that. Across the chamber, the queen finally moved. She rose from her throne, the motion slow and deliberate, drawing every eye in the room. Her presence carried a weight that pressed against the air itself, a reminder of everything she was. Ruler, strategist, survivor. She descended the steps. Each footfall echoed softly through the chamber as she approached. The distance between them closed. Ethan felt it before he fully looked up, the sheer intensity of her attention. When she stopped in front of him, the silence deepened. Her gaze dropped to her daughter. For a long moment she said nothing. Then quietly, "She has not slept like this in many cycles." Ethan hesitated. He wasn't sure if he was supposed to respond. But honesty came easier than diplomacy. "She looks like she needed it." The Queen's eyes shifted to him. There was no anger there. Only something far more difficult to face. Curiosity. "You could wake her," she said. Ethan glanced down again. The princess had shifted slightly, pressing closer, her grip tightening instinctively as if sensing the possibility of being moved. He shook his head. "That doesn't feel right." A ripple passed through the chamber. Not shock. Something quieter. The Queen studied him carefully. "You remain uncomfortable." "That's an understatement." "And yet you do not move." Ethan let out a slow breath. He could feel the strain in his muscles, the growing ache in his spine, the complete absence of sensation in his legs. But none of that seemed important. "She trusts me," he said softly. The words hung in the air. Simple, uncomplicated, powerful in a way no strategy ever could be. The Queen did not respond immediately. Instead, she looked back down at her daughter. Something in her expression changed. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but real. For the first time since entering the chamber, Ethan realized something extraordinary. The Queen was not thinking like a ruler. She was thinking like a mother. Around them the court remained still, watching, waiting. And in the center of it all sat a human, unarmed, out of place, and completely unremarkable by every measurable standard of power, doing something none of them had managed to do. He gave the princess peace. Time continued to pass. The council never resumed. No one dared interrupt the moment. Because somewhere deep within that vast, powerful chamber, an unspoken truth had begun to settle. For all their technology, for all their knowledge, for all their control over stars and systems, they did not understand this. But the human did. And that frightened them. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was simple. And simplicity, in a galaxy built on complexity, was the rarest thing of all. The chamber remained silent. Not because nothing was happening, but because something impossible was. The princess, who had not responded to anyone in days, was still holding on to the human. Her small fingers clutched Ethan's uniform like it was the only thing keeping her anchored. And for the first time since the incident, she wasn't trembling. Ethan didn't move, didn't speak. He simply stayed. Steady. Present. Because somehow, that was enough. Across the chamber, the Queen watched carefully. Her sharp, calculating gaze had softened, but only slightly. "This makes no sense," one of the advisors whispered. "It doesn't have to," another replied quietly. "It's working." The medical drones hovered closer, scanning. "Stabilization confirmed," one reported. "Neural patterns returning to baseline. Emotional distress decreasing." That last line changed everything. The Queen stepped forward, slowly, carefully, as if approaching something fragile. "Daughter," she called softly. The princess didn't respond. Not to her. Not to the room. Only to him. Her grip tightened slightly. Ethan felt it. He glanced down at her, then spoke gently. "Hey, you're okay." Her breathing shifted. Not fear. Recognition. "She hears him," an advisor murmured in disbelief. "That's not possible," another said. "There's no linguistic bridge." "Then it's not language," the Queen said quietly. All eyes turned to her. "It's something else." Ethan swallowed. He didn't understand the science. Didn't understand the alien tech. But he understood one thing. That look. He'd seen it before. Not in space. Not in war. But back on Earth. In people who had been through too much. People who didn't need answers. They just needed someone to stay. "You're not alone," he said softly. The princess's fingers loosened just slightly. Her breathing steadied further. And then, she moved. Just a little. Her head shifted against his chest, as if listening, feeling the rhythm. Heartbeat. Simple. Constant. If. The entire chamber froze. She's synchronizing, a drone reported. Emotional alignment increasing. The queen exhaled slowly. For the first time since the crisis began, hope appeared. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. "What are you doing, human?" she asked quietly. Ethan shook his head slightly. "Nothing." That answer lingered. Because it was the truth. He wasn't fixing her. Wasn't analyzing her. Wasn't trying to control the situation. He was just there. Minutes passed. No one interrupted. No one dared. Because the impossible was continuing. The princess, who had rejected an entire empire, was calming down. Because of one human. Small sound. So faint most didn't catch it. But Ethan did. A whisper. "Stay." He blinked. Looked down. Her eyes were still closed. But she had spoken. The chamber erupted. Not in noise but in shock. She spoke. She hasn't spoken since the storm. "This is." "Silence," the queen commanded. Instant stillness. Ethan leaned slightly closer. "I'm here," he said softly. Her grip tightened again. Not in fear. In trust. And that changed everything. The queen straightened. Her decision forming. Clear. Final. "This human," she said, her voice echoing through the chamber, "will remain." The advisors looked stunned. "Your Majesty, protocol is irrelevant." Her gaze never left Ethan. Whatever this connection is, it is saving her. That was all that mattered. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Yeah, no pressure." A few guards exchanged confused glances. They didn't understand the tone. But the tension had shifted. The fear was fading. Replaced by something unfamiliar. Relief. The princess shifted again, more comfortably now. Still holding him. Still steady. And for the first time since the storm, she looked peaceful. Not fully healed. Not completely safe. But no longer lost. Ethan looked around the massive alien chamber. At the advanced tech. At the powerful beings who couldn't reach her. Then back down at the small hand gripping his sleeve. And he understood something simple. Strength wasn't always power. Sometimes. It was just staying when everyone else didn't know how. The chamber lights dimmed slightly as systems adjusted. Monitoring. Recording. Witnessing. Because this moment, this quiet, impossible moment, would be remembered. Not as a medical breakthrough. Not as a scientific discovery. But as something far stranger. An empire had failed to reach its own princess. And a human had done it without even trying. The chamber didn't move. No one spoke. Because the next moment would decide everything. The princess stirred. Her fingers, still wrapped tightly around Ethan's sleeve, twitched slightly. Breath. Deeper this time. Stronger. Alive. Ethan felt it instantly. He didn't look up. Didn't call for anyone. He just stayed where he was. Steady as before. "Hey," he said quietly. "Take your time." Her head shifted. Slowly. Carefully. Like someone returning from a place they weren't sure they could escape. And then, her eyes opened. Fully. A sharp inhale rippled across the chamber. Every guard tensed. Every advisor froze. The queen stepped forward. But stopped. 'Cause something was different. There was no panic. No fear. No chaos. The princess blinked once. Then again. Her gaze moved across the room. Bright lights. Unknown faces. Towering figures. And then. Stop. Him. Ethan. He stared. Not confused. Not afraid. Certain. "You stayed." Her voice was clearer now. Stronger than before. Ethan gave a small nod. "Yeah," he said. "Told you I would." Was. Her grip tightened slightly. Not desperate. Grounded. "I remember," she whispered. The room leaned in without moving. Even the drones paused mid-air. The queen's voice came softly. "What do you remember, child?" The princess didn't look at her. Not yet. Her eyes stayed on Ethan. The storm, she said. And suddenly, the air felt heavier, colder. It wasn't just noise, she continued. It was empty. Ethan's expression shifted slightly. He understood that word. Me. I called for everyone, she said, her voice trembling just a little. But it didn't echo. It didn't answer. It was like I didn't exist anymore. Silence. Uncomfortable. Real. And then, Ethan asked gently. Her fingers curled tighter. I heard something, she said. The Queen stepped closer, tension rising again. What did you hear? The princess finally looked away from Ethan. Slowly, she turned toward her mother. And for the first time, there was no distance in her eyes. Nothing, she said. The word hit harder than anything else. Because now they understood. It wasn't the storm that broke her. It was the silence after. The absence. The feeling of being completely alone. Ethan exhaled slowly. Yeah, he said under his breath. That'll do it. The Queen closed her eyes briefly. For all their power, all their knowledge, they had misunderstood. They tried to fight the storm. But the real damage was what came after. The princess looked back at Ethan. But then, she said softly, I heard something again. The chamber stilled. Hope fragile but rising. Ethan frowned slightly. What? She hesitated, as if trying to understand it herself. Not words, she said. Not sound. Her grip on him tightened. You. Ethan blinked. Me. She nodded faintly. I didn't know what it was, she continued. But it didn't disappear. Didn't fade. It didn't leave. Her voice softened. It stayed. The realization spread across the chamber like a wave. Not technology. Not language. Not power. Presence. Pure, unwavering presence. The Queen looked at Ethan again. But this time, there was no question in her eyes. Only understanding. You anchored her, she said quietly. Ethan shook his head. I didn't even know she could hear me. That is why it worked. A long silence followed. Not empty this time. Full. Complete. The princess shifted, sitting up slightly now, but still holding on to him. Not because she had to. 'Cause she wanted to. The Queen straightened. Her voice returned, not cold, not distant, but strong. Let it be recorded across all systems. Every device in the chamber activated. Every being stood still. This human did not heal her with science. Nor with power. Her gaze locked onto Ethan. He healed her by refusing to leave. The weight of those words settled deeply. Because it was something they could not replicate. Something they could not manufacture. Something they had never valued before. The Queen stepped forward. And then, she did something no one expected. She lowered her head. Not as a ruler, but in respect. The chamber followed instantly. Guards knelt. Advisors bowed. Even the drones dipped lower. Ethan blinked, caught off guard. Okay, that's still weird. A faint ripple passed through the room. Not laughter, but something close to it. The tension finally was gone. The princess leaned lightly against him again. This time her eyes remained open. Clear. Present. You're not allowed to leave, she said quietly. Ethan sighed softly. Yeah. Figured that might happen. The Queen didn't argue. Didn't correct her. Instead, she spoke with quiet finality. He will remain. No debate. No hesitation. An entire empire had just made its decision. Not based on strength. Not based on rank. But on something far simpler. Trust. Ethan looked around the massive chamber one last time. At the beings who once saw him as insignificant. At the power that once felt overwhelming. And then back at the small hand still holding on to him. And he smiled faintly. Because in the end, it wasn't power that saved her. It wasn't technology. It wasn't an empire. It was a human. Who stayed. Even when he didn't understand why. And somewhere beyond the stars, that story would spread. Not as legend, not as myth, but as a quiet truth. That in the face of the void, humanity's greatest strength was never leaving someone behind. Fire.